Hello and good morning, everyone. How we doing? Welcome to the Offer Holder Day activities with Khaled and Olivier. How is everyone? The chat is quiet. Yes, Saturday morning, 11:15. Thank you very much for coming and attending. Yes, Khaled is smiling already because what? I'm saying silly stuff. Yes, I am
No,
most of the time. No, no. Hello,
it's
Khaled.
Saturday
How are
morning.
you
I'm
doing?
happy to be here.
How are you doing, Khaled?
Yeah, I'm doing all right. Doing all right. It's nice and sunny today, but we're at home as usual anyway. So
That's
all
true. Me
good.
working from home with my in my little office with plenty of Lego in the background, plenty of board games, a handful of pop figurine, a popular Warhammer. Yeah, plenty of stuff
And
that I
I
like
have
doing in my
a
spare
door.
time. You've got a door, yes, magnificent white door. All right, let's get started. So. Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Oliver Simonesic. I'm a lecturer in computer science, and I'm teaching games programming, physics simulation, and other modules at the University of Lincoln. I am also the admission tutor, so you probably exchange a couple of emails with me about your grades, about potential careers and opportunities at the University of Lincoln. I'm me. That's me. I'm also doing a lot of stuff in digital board games, which also explains all the games in the background that I've got. I'm also got interest in crowd simulation, crowd AI, and I've got a couple of papers and research going on in indoor location systems. So I'm also highly interested in maps and everything that we can put on maps. I'm also joined by Dr. Khaled Bashir. Khaled, do you want to say a couple of words about yourself?
Yes, hello, thank you. So my name is Khaled Bashur. I'm a lecturer here as well. So I teach mostly on design fields, so in computer science, so user experience design, game design. We also teach game studies and mobile development and stuff like that. I'm also the senior personal tutor, so you'll see me very early on when you join the university, where I start talking to you about how we support our students, mental health stuff and personal issues, and how we help you get through university as well. So that's kind of my pastoral role in addition to my teaching. But today I'm mostly going to be talking to you about teaching, and I'm going to talk to you about user experience design, which is my kind of area of research as well. So I'm interested in human-computer interaction. I'm interested in collaborative learning, how we use technology to learn together, how we use technology to do things together. I'm also interested in serious games, so how we use games to do something that isn't just fun, right? And this is kind of something that pops up quite a lot in some of the modules we teach here at Lincoln. But yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting you guys next year. But today I'll be talking a little bit about user experience design once Olivier gives me the green light. So
That's true, yes. Yep. You say a little, even though earlier you showed me about 60 slides of content, which is fantastic. Yeah, I've got about 40 slides as well about game stuff, but we'll get to that. So again, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the city of Lincoln. I've got a picture of the cathedral, which dominates the skylight, the skyline, not the skylight of around Lincoln. You can see it from my scooters everywhere. Also, Lincoln well, I mentioned I love maps. Of course, I have to have a screenshot of a map where Lincoln is. We've got over 2,000 years of history. Lincoln can be tracked back as a 300 BC and links to the city's past heritage and even today. Also, it's considered one of the friendliest city, as according to data from the Eden Project in 2016. And it's also one of the top 5 happiest places to live and work in the UK. So again, Lincoln is that little place in the East Midlands, so not too far from Leeds, from Sheffield, Nottingham, Norwich, Peterborough. We're about 2 hours away, train ride from London. And we've got students from all around the country. So for instance, last week I was talking to my third year project students who are from the south, close to Chelmsford. I've got a couple of students from the Isle of Brighton. Got a couple of students from the south of Welsh. I know one student as well close to Liverpool. I'm sure, Khaled, your personal TUT students, whereabouts are they from?
They come from all over. Last day I was talking to my project student who's from Kent. He lives there, and we've got people from all over the UK really, and from abroad as well. I'm myself. I'm not from anywhere near here as well, so neither are you really. So
That's true. Yes, yeah.
quite a diverse community, both from within the UK and from abroad as well.
That is true, yes, because I moved to Lincoln about 15 years ago and absolutely love it here. Seen the city grow a lot and change a lot over the last couple of years, and it's getting bigger and better and more popular, which is brilliant because, for instance, it's beautiful. I took those pictures last summer. That's me close, that's actually close to university, close to the main building, looking towards the cathedral. Absolutely brilliant, with the Brayford pool, with the little ducks and ducklings around it, with a blurry picture of one of the main buildings of the university, and of course the cathedral uphill, which is absolutely fantastic. Also used for a couple of filming locations. Lincoln is absolutely brilliant, but also Lincoln is capturing the imagination of game designers. For instance, last week, one major games company announced an RTS game, which will have a couple of missions set in Lincoln itself. Lincoln is part of an open world game. A couple of screenshots from down here. That is actually for going uphill. Basically, that place where I stood earlier, and of course, another popular simulator down here. Khaled, have you played any of those games? Well, I played this one. I'm looking forward to play this one. Have
Not
you?
not played not played any of these ones specifically.
Not
No.
any of these one,
I think I
because
played the one that you mentioned before about that's about to be announced, but well, I've not played that
yes,
one. Obviously, I played the
yep,
predecessors.
yep. Because although those games were not developed in Lincoln, we do have one that a couple of our staff members at the School of Computer Science have developed, and it's called Lincoln Island.
Yeah, I played
And
that
it's
one.
you played that one. So have I, and it's fantastic. It's a reimagination of the center of the campus at the University of Lincoln, but just within a pirate theme. And if you download the game, play it, you can explore the campus virtually and talk to a couple of NPCs. Which actually, are you in the game as well as an NPC?
I don't think they put me in it. No, I played it once and I
Ah,
looked for myself. I couldn't find myself, but I found some of our other members of staff. You can talk to them and sort of find out a little bit about the campus from virtual avatars that represent some of our lecturers as well. It's quite fun.
you have to talk to Chris to try to add you to the game. So yeah, students at University of Lincoln are at the heart of everything that we do. We've got award-winning teaching, and we've got great industry links with outstanding user experience. Also, we are gold standard university with a 5-star ratings. We've got over 17,000 students on the campus itself, and 10% of our student community were from outside of the UK. As well, we've got plenty of staff members from all around the world. Well, Khaled mentioned he's from outside the UK. I'm myself from Europe, from a tiny country called Luxembourg. And the university itself is one of the top 150 universities in the world. We've also been nominated, not nominated, forgot the word now. We've been chosen as the Modern University of the Year by the Times and Sunday Times Good University Guide 2021, and we're in the top 20 in the UK for students' experience, as according to the Times and Sunday Times. By the way, something that I forgot mentioning at the start of the presentation, that if you've got any questions about anything that I say or let's say, please feel free to use the chat, even just to say hello to us. So don't be afraid, interact with us, ask questions, feel free to ping anything.
Or questions about the program as well, not necessarily the topics we're talking about. If you have any questions about coming to Lincoln, feel free to ask. We'll do our best to answer. We might not be able to answer everything, but please feel free to ask anything.
All right, I do have a picture here from Google Earth from our campus. Of course, the campus is changing all the time. For instance, now there's a big medical school building being built. Actually, it's as good as finished now. And we've got here our main building, the Isaac Newton building, the I&B building, close to Lincoln, where our School of Computer Science is. And we've got the cathedral in the background. The high street is somewhere here. The Brayford pool that I showed a picture of earlier. We're pretty much a center of city campus, and you can walk from the campus to the city center, to the pubs, to the bars, to the shops in pretty much 5-10 minutes. Very central. The School of Computer Science is also home for a broad range of expertise in computer technology, information system, including specialist topics in robotics, autonomous systems, computer vision, engineering, medical application, games computing, VR, AR stuff, data science, machine learning, AI, human-computer interaction. We've got over 1,000 students at our School of Computer Science. The programs we offer, we've got undergraduate programs like computer science, we've got MCOM as well, computer science, BSc, games computing, and an MSc in mathematics and computer science. We've also got a handful of postgraduate programs: robotics, autonomous systems, computer science, MSc, games development design, MSc, intelligent vision, cloud computing, data science, and of course, we've got pathways for PhDs and more. And all the information I'm giving you here is correct at the time of me presenting you. Couple of pictures that I took as well on Tuesday afternoon when the labs were a bit empty. Of course, now they look empty because of lockdown, but usually during those times, our labs that we've got in the INB building are buzzing with excitement, with endless students sitting there, a bit anxious, a bit stressed, but actually all good because they're working hard on their project. So that's a screenshot, a real life screenshot, Oliver. A picture of one of the labs, a picture outside of the labs of a couple of the arcade machines that we've got around that one of our staff members built. Those arcade machines are available for you guys to put your own games on it or own tools to do your own research. We've got a handful of more specialized labs as well. For instance, we've got a lab with better hardware and more technology, VR kits lying around. It's just a couple of pictures that I took of what we've got. Does not represent everything, but I wanted to give you an idea what it looks like within the INB building. As well, those labs, I know I talked to a technician last week and he's working hard on upgrading the machines because we're upgrading them regularly, changing them, changing the layout of the labs, changing everything. And actually, I enjoyed teaching in those labs a lot because we've got a couple of projectors, we've got a handful of screens everywhere. And I really like standing there in front of the crowd, teaching them how to do C++, doing silly jokes, looking at Khaled, looking if he's smiling at my jokes. Sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. He's smiling now. That means I'm doing good stuff. Oh, fantastic.
Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. So
yeah. And that is great work. It's very good facilities because you're not only enjoying the facilities, but you're also going to work with a lot of staff members. And I'm giving you the link towards all the staff members we've got at the University of Lincoln. And that's just a handful of people you're going to work with. So for instance, you're going to work with me throughout your first year and third year. Khaled mentioned a couple of modules that you guys are going to work with. We all have got a background either in academia or industry or both. And we're working hard, giving you the best learning experience that the university can offer. So we've got, for instance, I see the name Chris Hadleyant here, who designed and developed Lincoln Island. Derek Foster doing a lot of cloud computing stuff. Philip Carlyle, who worked in the games industry. Just a couple of names here. Those are brilliant stuff, and we're all motivated, and we're all very keen getting you on board to teach you the best in computer science and games computing. Because right now, you guys are at the moment of your life where you can choose to do anything that you want. And although I would love to say that's a very easy decision, it is not. I've been there. I've been through, I was 15 years, 16, 17, 18. I don't know how old you guys are. And all the choice that I had, it was overwhelming. And I recall my first semester at university, my first year, it was very tricky and difficult. I was there on my own. There was a massive culture shock, saying goodbye to my family in Luxembourg and being thrown in the midst of a city that I didn't know much, where I didn't know anybody. Massive culture shock as well. And then the assignments came and the brief and CRGs. However, though, I got into the rhythm more and more because I found out I'm not the only one in that boat. I got to know friends. I got to meet people, actually friends that I'm still in touch with, that actually lifelong friends. And I learned so much throughout those years. Throughout my BSc, made so many friends, learned so much, got a lot of experience, and that put me forward. I built a bridge. That's why I really like this picture, just to show you it's all about getting forward and comparing yourself not to others, but comparing yourself to where you were last year. Because in 1 year's time, if you decide to come to University of Lincoln, you'll be looking back at all that you've done throughout that year, all the stuff that you programmed, all the experiences, all the skill that you've learned. And then you start thinking, hey, last year I was sitting in an OHD listening to Khaled and Oliver, and now I finished my first year of university. And then perhaps in 3 years' time, you'll be sitting there in the cathedral during the graduation ceremony thinking, hey, 3 years ago, I was just a little teenager, but now 3 years later, I'm sitting here with my graduation document in my hand, saying hello to my family, who was proudly sitting there in the cathedral as well. And then you can say, I've got a BSc in computer science or games computing. And that leads to employment, or perhaps a career in academia, or further studies with us with a master's degree or PhD degree. Absolutely brilliant. But again, you're not on your own. Khaled earlier mentioned personal tutoring. There's plenty of opportunities there. We've got system in place to ensure that there's a transition for you from college or wherever you are now to university. And we offer you the best through, well, peer monitoring, personal tutors, societies, support from universities. There's endless events, etc., etc. All right, so today's content, Khaled, you said you're going to talk about UX stuff. Am I right? Yes, I should be.
Yes, you are right. I'm talking about UX stuff. We're talking about user experience design. We're talking about user-centered design. We'll talk about what usability is, and I'll go through all of those in a little bit. But we do have a question from James, who's asking, what kind of preparations do you recommend doing before we start the course? We get the question quite often, actually, and I think so normally we expect our students to not know anything we need them to know when they first join in. So when you join in, if you know anything other than some basic maths and some basic English language skills, you should be good enough. But if you want to get a head start, it's always helpful to sort of do some learn a bit of programming on your own. You know, you can never know too much programming, right? If you learn a bit of programming, learn a bit of Python on your own, just do some online tutorials that really give you a nice running start when you join the university. It's not necessary. We will teach you everything from scratch, but obviously if you do know some of these things, then it's going to be quite helpful.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Yeah, you covered everything there. So hopefully that answers your question, James. If not, feel free to ask further questions. We're very, very happy to help. So going back to the slide, so Khaled, as you said, is going to talk about UX stuff. And then I'll be taking over and I'm going to talk about C++ and games programming stuff. Because even though what I'll be talking about is games programming stuff, it is relevant for both games computing and computer science students. Because I do have a lot of students coming to me saying, hey, Oliver, your games programming stuff is very interesting. Can I get the lecture slides or may I attend those lectures? I'm like, yeah, that's no problem. Same for the specialist lectures that Khaled is doing for computer science. There's plenty of games computing students attending to those lectures because those two courses are very interlinked with each other. And there's no problem at all if you find another topic interesting that is not within your course to just have a look what's available. Spotted there's another question from Samuel Orman Chan. Which programming language do we use? Khaled, do you want to answer?
Sure, yeah. So we don't use any, well, we use specific ones, obviously. So it depends on which program you're on. If you're in computer science, then you'll start with Python, go on to C++ after in the second year once you start learning object-oriented programming. And I think in the third year, you might end up doing some physics simulation, for example, where you use a specialized language for that. Games computing students, you will also do C++ and Python, but additionally, you will have to learn C# for Unity programming because we use Unity to make our games. And then later on, with Oliver, you will learn games programming with some, also C++ with some additional libraries, though. So primarily, I would say Python, C++, and C# are going to be the things you'll be most likely to encounter.
Yep, that's correct. Additionally, what you learn is a skill that you can apply any programming, that you can learn any programming language very easily. So for instance, if you learn the basics of Python, all the skills, all the syntax, all the stuff that you learn in Python, you can then translate it into C++, and then you can translate that into any other programming language. So for instance, I'm giving you an example of programming a lottery simulator. You can then find a solution using pseudocode, and then translate that pseudocode into one programming language, for instance, Python, and then translate that into another language. You learn the skills to learn any programming languages on your own. So, for instance, when you finish the course, that then you can, for instance, move to Java and then apply React and get all of that done. So we're teaching specific programming language, but also teaching you the skills to learn to apply programming in any language that you want to use.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think a lot of people kind of confuse university programs for just a set of programming language instruction courses. You can learn programming languages on YouTube. It's very easy. What we do teach is how to program, how to think about programming, how to think logically about software, how to think about what needs to happen to get from point A to point B with code. And it's much more abstract and conceptual than just learning the syntax of a programming language, which, like Oliver said, once you learn one, you can learn anything after that.
Yep, that's true. Again, to add a bit more on top of it, for instance, I mentioned that I'll be talking about games programming. A lot of the algorithms that I'm teaching were most likely written in assembler in very basic language, but the idea behind it, the algorithm, the logic behind it can then be reapplied in any other programming language. Hope that answers the question. If not, feel free again to ask even more questions. So again, feel free to socialize with us, ask any question, but I also want to point out that we've got a very, very busy YouTube account that you can find by just going on Google or YouTube and search for School of Computer Science Lincoln. We've got plenty of talks there, talks like the British Science Week talks, where we talk about writing secure multiplayer games, introduction to shaders in Unity, about crowd AI, computing, etc. So more specialized talks. We've also got plenty of talks from Enhancement Week talks like robots in the wild, wildest player experience, board game stuff, and more. You can also have a look at our previous offer holiday activities. Like I know Ben did a talk recently. James, basically, they talked about Python, they talked about robotics, imaging. Have a look at our YouTube page for even more lectures and content from the University of Lincoln, from the School of Computer Science. We're not only on YouTube, but we've also got plenty of pages on social media, like on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. Just search for School of Computer Science Lincoln. And again, feel free to ask questions in the chat. If you don't feel confident to ask questions in the chat, feel free to ping me an email, osymenezyk@lincoln.ac.uk. Don't worry, I'll write this email in the chat, so you can just copy paste me for sending me an email. Again, I'm the admission tutor. I'm also happy to talk to you about opportunities at university, about your grade, about what you require to be admitted at University of Lincoln, etc., etc. Also very happy to have a chat with you one-on-one over Teams or Google. Can do that, no worries. All right, we've got another question by First Class Gravy, fantastic username. And he would like to know what kind of work placement have students gotten in the past? Khaled, do you want to answer that?
So I know we have students, quite a few students who do placements every year. Some of them do it over summer, some of them do it as a full year placement. I can't, off the top of my head, name any sort of specific companies that they have worked in. They work generally either within the, I know that they work sometimes within sort of like local kind of businesses, but they often work in quite far from Lincoln as well. So I've seen people who are doing placements in London and in Loughborough and sort of Manchester and Lincoln and Sheffield. So I can't remember the names of the companies that we have. If you would like to know more, I can give you the contact details of the person in charge in our school, who is Samuel Cave. He's in charge of helping students find placements, so he'll have a much better answer to that. But unfortunately, I don't really know the actual names of places that he worked in. But Oliver might know something. Do you know something?
Yes. We have had a lot of students getting placement, for instance, in the south, in London, for instance, working with a company who was working with the Ministry of Defense, doing some coding for safety and security systems. We've got other students who had placements with banking, working also on systems to detect possible intrusions. And they were very, very happy with those placements, even though they were a bit overwhelmed at the start. They showcased to the employers that they had everything to work within their companies. And actually, at the end of their placement, they were asked to have a chat with the director of that company, and they were offered a position at their company after they finish their undergraduate studies, and that's fantastic. We also had students working in a placement in the games industry. For instance, one of the students worked with companies in Guildford and with companies close to Leamington Spa. And I'm confident as well that they're going to get a job position once they finish their placement, because they're very happy with our students. So hopefully First Class Gravy, I absolutely love the name. I like the user icon as well. Hope that answers your question. But again, feel free to ask any questions about anything, even when Khaled is doing his part, because I'm going to give now the screen to him. So Khaled, are you ready? Do you want to start your talk?
Yes, happy to do that.
All right, so I'll stay in the chat. I'll try to answer questions as much as possible. So Khaled, you've got the screen now.
Thank you, Oliver. So yeah, if you have any questions still about the program and stuff, feel free to put them in the chat. Oliver will answer those in the chat. If you have questions about my lecture, feel free to put those as well. I will address those directly myself. So I'm gonna give you sort of like a taster lecture. It's gonna be about half an hour. It's about user usability and user experience, or an intro to HCI. HCI is human-computer interaction. So this is the field of computer science that isn't very technical in a sense. It's not so much about programming. It's about how do we build things, but it's about understanding how do we make things that work from a human perspective, because we need to. It's not enough to just build something that works functionally. It's important for it to work from a user's point of view. People need to be able to understand how to use them. You need to be able to want to use them. You need to be able to enjoy using them as well. So what we're going to basically be talking about is we're going to talk about what user-centered design is and why is it quite difficult. We'll talk about user experience, what it is, and we'll talk about usability, which is a kind of part of user experience, but quite an important part that we know quite a lot about at this point. And we'll talk about the concept of iterative design. Why is it important? Why do we use it when designing user experiences? Why can't we just do a design in one go? So some of this might not make sense to you, but that's the point of learning, is that you start not knowing something and then you end up knowing about it. So hopefully by the end of this lecture, you'll know what all these terms mean and how they relate to each other and why they're important. So let's start with this little few pictures. I'm sure you've all been to a park once in your life, or you've been somewhere where there's grass and there's a path next to it. And then you notice over time, these kind of little organic natural paths start getting created by people because they keep using a lot of people cross the park in a particular way to get from one point to the other. That wasn't originally planned by the park designer. So the park designer will place some paths, and the people will end up using different paths that aren't quite part of the original design of the park. And you see them everywhere. And they're really interesting because they call these desire paths. So these are paths that show what people would have wanted you to put, right? This is the path that people wished you had as a park designer, or as when you're designing certain locations. This is what you would have liked you to actually put. And it's quite nice because you can visually see what the original design was, and right next to it you see what the users would have wanted. And why do these things happen? And they happen for a bunch of reasons. One of them might be that the park designer didn't really consider the user as the main thing, right? They might have considered, for example, if you look at the one on the bottom left, the park designer clearly thought it'll be nicer to have a round thing. It might look nicer in pictures. It might look nicer in our brochures. It might be nicer kind of for people on a stroll. But they didn't quite consider that actually when a person wants to go from point A to point B, they don't want to go in needless, unnecessary circles. They want to just go from point A to point B. Right. So one of the reasons why these things happen is because the designer in this case did not consider the user themselves. And this is kind of something that we in computer science very much like to avoid. Whenever we do anything in computing, whenever we're building any computer system that is aimed at users to use, we like to take the approach that is called user-centered design, that we should never make anything in a system that isn't designed or isn't there to help a user achieve their goals. And that seems like, oh, that would solve that problem, right? That would make it easier. All I have to do is focus my design on what the user needs, and then all is good in the world. But it's not quite easy. The other reason why these kind of failures in design happen is because user-centered design is extremely complicated, right? It's very, very complex problem to solve. Let's take this example. This is a map of the University of Lincoln, our campus. So if you say, try to imagine, for example, you want to draw the paths in that line. You want to predict where people are going to be going so that you can lay out paths for them to use. One thing you might say as well, I think people will most likely go from the library to the coffee shop. That's what people do all their day, right? They go to the coffee shop, have coffee. They go to the library, work. They go back to the coffee shop, have coffee. They go back to the library and work. And that seems like a good guess as to what kind of most used paths will be. But the fact is, the world is not that simple. There's going to be a billion things. First of all, there's a billion coffee shops around the library. So which ones are people going to go to? You've got your student accommodation on the top left, which is where people are going to be might start their day. Well, they probably will start their day there. They might end their day there as well. You got the sports center, which is number 9, right below the student accommodation. You've got Wagamamas across the pond. Maybe that's where people are going to go get their coffee. Maybe that's what people are going to spend a lot of their time in because that's what they like to do. You've got the train station. You've got the library. You've got all sorts of different things. So as a matter of fact, the world is actually quite complicated, and trying to simplify it by saying people are most likely to go from point A to point B is not that easy. So you end up with these situations where you have these desired paths where someone goes, oh, here's where the path is, but actually people want to do something else because you hadn't thought about it. And it's very difficult to think about this. Not only is the world itself complicated, but people are complicated. People are actually weird. I don't know if you've ever met people or if you've ever seen people. They're weird, right? They do some really weird stuff. They imagine like you design a park and you think this park is great because I made it so that people can go from point A to point E very quickly, and then turns out that your user is someone who likes to walk their pet crocodile and only walks in zigzags, and that's what you end up encountering. You design something that works very well, and turns out that your user is entirely different. So trying to sort of come up with a look at a situation, look at a world with people in it. The world already is complicated. People are extremely weird, and trying to just design the correct solution is really, really hard. You have to take so many things into account. You have to account for all sorts of things that you would not expect at all. And so it's just not something that is very easy to do. And that's why when you see these things, and there's quite a lot of those kind of desired paths, because everywhere someone's trying to build something, there's going to be a problem in terms of finding the correct solution. So this is kind of where the idea of iterative design comes from. Iterative design is a solution to this kind of really, really complicated problems. Instead of telling me here's this really complex problem, give me a solution. And so instead of going and thinking, right, I'm going to start thinking about all the possible things that can go wrong, all the possible things that are part of the system, and all the possible variables and things that interact with each other, including the people, which, like I said, were very weird, and then find a single perfect solution that fixes everything. This is not very easy. So instead, what I do is I follow a process called iterative design, where instead of trying to find the perfect solution from the first go, I will do it in steps. I will say, I'll just make a solution. Let's do this and see if that works. So I'll decide what I want to do. I'll figure out how do I want to do it. I'll do it and then see if it works. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, I'll go again. What's wrong with it? How do I fix that? Fix that, do it again. So that way, I don't have to think about one single perfect solution, which might take me forever. I might not ever get to it. I'll just take it one step at a time. I'll think, right, I'll make this path, see how it works. I'll watch people using it. If they don't like it, I'll change it and do something else. And we keep doing that. So this is kind of the simple way of describing it. Peanut butter is an underrated hair product, much like Gorilla Glue. Yes, indeed. I've not used them myself, but thanks for the tip. I'll keep that in mind. So this is kind of what it actually looks like. The iterative design process is, first of all, I have to understand the requirements of my system. What is it I need to do? I design something, I build it, I evaluate it. Does it work or does it not work? Once my evaluation is complete, I decide, right, this needs to be fixed because this doesn't work very well. I go again, and I keep doing that. That way, I don't have to sort of absorb the entire problem into my head and find a single solution for it, because that's really hard. What instead I will do is I'll take the problem one step at a time. I'll try to come up with a solution, see if that works, and I keep iterating. And then it becomes a matter of trial and error. You keep trying something, and then the more things you try, the more times you try, the closer you get to something that will work. So basically, what you need to understand, what are the requirements first. And when you design a computer system, what we're interested in is the user experience. We want to design a good user experience, and that already in itself is a complicated beast, as we'll see over the next 20 or 30 slides. So user experience itself is not something that is very simple. It's about as complicated, if not more complicated, than trying to find out the perfect paths for people in a park. So first of all, let's try to understand what is user experience. And you've probably all heard of the term user experience, and you might have seen different people talk about it. You might have read something about it if you're interested in that. You might have been using a system and someone complains about the user experience. The term itself is very commonly used, but not very easily understood. Here's Donald Norman. I don't know if you've heard of Donald Norman. Probably not. He's a quite an important name in user experience design. He actually worked for Apple in the time when they were building the iPhones and stuff like that, the first iPhones. He almost invented the term user experience design. So here's him explaining to us what user experience is. I'll let him. It's a short video where he explains to us what he thinks user experience is.
Once upon a time, a very long time ago, I was at Apple. And we said the experience of using these computers is weak. The experience, when you first discover it, when you see it in the store, when you buy it, when you, can't fit it into the car. It's in this great big box. It doesn't fit into the car. And when you finally do get it home, opening the box up and, it looks scary. I don't know if I dare put this computer together. All of that is user experience. It's everything that touches upon your experience with the product. And it may not even be near the product. It may be when you're telling somebody else about it. That's what we meant when we devised the term user experience and set up what we called the User Experience Architect's Office at Apple to try to enhance things. Now, Apple was already pretty good, so we were starting with a good product, making it even better. Today, that term has been horribly misused. It's used by people to say, I'm a user experience designer. I design websites or I design apps. And they have no clues to what they're doing. And they think the experience is that simple device, the website or the app or who knows what. No, it's everything. It's the way you experience the world. It's the way you experience your life. It's the way you experience the service. Or, an app or a computer system. But it's a system, it's everything. Got it?
So Don Norman is explaining to us that user experience is not just about the interface and where to put the buttons and stuff like that. It's a lot more than that. And it's important to understand that even though as computer scientists, we're not really going to learn how to, for example, what sort of box we're going to use to put our device in, but we need to understand that this is part of the user experience. So if we look at what he's actually trying to say, we can look at all the different things that affect the user experience, right? So we can start with the packaging and advertising. When you're buying an iPhone, for example, your experience of buying an iPhone starts the first time you see an ad for it, right? You think, oh, this looks exciting, and you start getting excited. You get an emotional response to seeing an ad, or you might not at all, depending on the kind of person you are, if you like these products or not. When you buy it, the box itself evokes certain emotions. You're experiencing the product before you've even turned it on, right? The customer service is part of user experience. I don't know if you've ever had to deal with customer service. Maybe you're about to enter a world where you're going to be talking to customer service quite a lot, and you're going to find out that a lot of the times it's actually really, really frustrating. Sometimes it's actually quite pleasant. That's part of the user experience. When I buy a physical device or I buy any kind of service, dealing with a customer service is part of my experience as well. the company's policy might affect my user experience, right? If you're going to the supermarket and you buy something and you know it's fair trade, or you know it's using carbon neutral offsetting, or you know that the product you're using online has a very good privacy policy that's protecting your data, you feel better, right? It's part of your user experience. You feel good about yourself. You feel good about the product that you're using. It's all part of that thing. And if you're buying a product that, if you're buying, for example, a can of tuna where you know that they killed 20 dolphins to get that tuna for you, you're not going to feel very good about yourself, even if the tuna tastes perfectly fine. So the policy of the company that you're in affects your user experience. Facebook has suffered quite a lot from that, because a lot of people have been attacking Facebook over the last few years because of its policies on privacy aren't very good. Its policies on fake news aren't very good. Like celebrities and everyone in between have been leaving Facebook in droves, trying to say, making a statement saying, I don't feel good using your product, because your product, even if it allows me to connect with my friends the way it's intended, even if it works perfectly well, even if the interface is designed very well, even if it doesn't crash or doesn't have any errors in it, I don't want to use it because I don't feel good about the way your company sees the world. And that's not true, not just true for the company itself, but also true for the individual people that represent it, right? You might be, people don't buy at Amazon anymore because they don't like Jeff Bezos as a person. That personality of the CEO is part of the user experience. All of these things do actually affect our user experience. You might hear stories about Google on the BBC News, and it says that Google's not paying their taxes, and you feel bad about it, and you're like, why am I using a product for a company that doesn't pay their taxes? And you feel bad. Or you might be a small government anti-tax person and think, good on Google for finding a way to reduce stupid taxes, and I'm going to support them. All of these things make us affect the way we feel when we interact with the system. And finally, obviously, the product itself. The product itself, whether it's an iPhone or the app on the iPhone, or sort of a computer system, or any kind of thing that you would use, even if it's just a service like Deliveroo, for example. These are all products, and the experience of using the product itself will obviously affect our user experience. So it's important to know all of this stuff. And obviously, as a computer scientist, like I said, you're here doing a bachelor's in computer science or in games computing. You are mostly going to be concerned with this one, right? You're not going to be concerned with advertising. That's the marketing people's job. You're not going to be concerned with the personality of the CEO. That's completely out of your control anyway, right? You're going to be concerned with the product itself. So that's kind of where we need to focus our efforts. But it's important to know that all of the other stuff is part of the user experience. And this is what Donald Norman was telling us in the video. User experience is not just the physical product, but it is the entire thing around it. But it's not very useful. So it's not very useful for me to tell you what is user experience. I'll tell you user experience is everything. That's not a very useful definition, right? We need to understand user experience slightly in a more practical way. And so that's kind of why we have to narrow down our understanding of user experience to this notion of the product itself, right? We're going to not worry about all the other stuff. Let's focus on user experience within the product. What makes a product itself give us a good user experience? And this is where we need to sort of understand user experience more as a constructive thing. So something we need to construct. How do we go from nothing to something that has a good user experience? So for that, let's look at it from a sort of academic way. User experience has four important components. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the four different components and try to understand what are the different ways in which we can improve a user's experience. So the first one is about the utility of the system, right? If you've ever browsed the App Store when you were bored, you will see, especially a few years ago, well, not a few years ago, but 10 years ago, when they first really started making apps for literally anything in the world, people started making all sorts of weird apps. And like I said, people are weird, they will make weird things. So there were apps like the electric shaver that creates an electric shaver on your phone that makes a sound that is completely useless. There's an app that is a game where you throw your phone as high as possible and you get score based on how high you threw it. Not something I would recommend anyone do with a phone that they've paid money for, because you might break it. So adding value to the user is part of user experience. If something isn't adding value to my life, if it's not useful, if it's not fun, if it's not engaging, if it's not if it's not, sorry, it doesn't make me feel like I've done something useful, then that's not a very good user experience. And we can talk about games as well. Games aren't necessarily useful in a productive sense, but they are useful in a sense that they entertain, right? And that's still a utility. So I'm not necessarily talking about productivity. I'm talking about utility, something that makes me that adds value to my life in any way. So the first element of user experience is value. For something to have a good user experience, it has to have value. It has to be useful. Seems very obvious, but as you see, some people do not particularly feel that value is that important. The other question you want to ask is, are people willing to use it? Just because something adds value doesn't mean that people will want to use it. Look at this. I don't know if you've seen this before. You might have missed this because you were maybe a little bit young when it happened, about 10 years ago. Maybe you weren't paying attention, or you were paying attention. And this is the Google Glasses. Google Glasses was a product developed by Google in 2008, I think. And they tried to sell it as an augmented reality system where you put it on your eyes and then you can see an overlay of information on the world around you. And that seems very useful, right? There seems to be value there. I can use it to translate things I'm reading. I can use it to take pictures without having to take my phone and point at people. But people didn't want to use it. And it was difficult at the time for Google to figure that out. They thought, this is useful, this is cool, I want to use it. Why doesn't everyone else want to use it? And there's a reason why that. People don't want to walk around with a camera pointing at their friends whenever they see someone. People don't want to walk around looking like a cyborg. There was an issue with it. There was a social acceptability issue. There was an adoptability issue. The system itself was not adoptable. People did not want to use it, even though it had value. And so the other element of user experience that we need to worry about is adoptability. Will people want this system in their life? Even if it adds value, even if they find it useful, will they actually want to use it? Sometimes they don't because of other reasons. Like we said, humans are weird. We have our own concerns. We have social anxieties. We have very kind of specific personal reasons why we might want or not want to do something. And when you develop a product that the majority of people have a social or personal issue with, then that's not a good product, even if it adds value to the small people who do use it. So adaptability is a thing that we need to worry about. The next thing we have to ask is it fun and engaging? And that might be true for a lot of things. It might be not true for a lot of things. And it's important to sort of distinguish between products that are fun and engaging and those that aren't. Microsoft Excel is not fun and engaging. It's still very useful. It's still very adoptable, but it's not fun and engaging. It doesn't make it a bad product. It just limits its user experience in that sense. So this is particularly important for things like games. You've played Pokemon Go, possibly. You've played. I don't know if you've seen the game on the right, which is called Ingress. If you're familiar with Pokemon Go, which probably you are, you might not be so familiar with Ingress. So Ingress is actually the grandparent of Pokemon Go, right? It's the original Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go is essentially a Ingress, but with Pokemon added to it. So Ingress was a game developed by Google, who also by Niantic Labs, who was at the time part of Google, who eventually made Pokemon Go. And the game was the same thing. You go around, you collect locations, and you pick up stuff by traveling around your city and going to important landmarks and gaining some clues. When they first made Ingress, it wasn't very successful. It was successful relatively, but nowhere near as successful as Pokemon Go. And even though it's the same game, Pokemon Go was a lot more successful because people got excited about Pokemon. People like Pokemon. They love them. They wanted to catch them all, right? And so Pokemon Go became a massive worldwide success, whereas Ingress was kind of limited in its success, even though they're partly the same game. And it's just because it was more fun. It was more engaging. I was much more interested in catching and finding and catching a Pikachu, which, well, I never actually did, than I was in just going to this abstract pillar in the middle of a city and getting points there. This added engagement was a very big determinant factor in the success of Pokemon Go. So the fourth element of user experience for us is it fun and engaging? And that's desirability. The system that we want to develop has to be desirable. We have to feel good and we have to feel happy and want to use it. And it's obviously, like we saw with the Excel example, not every system will have high desirability. Excel has so much value that it doesn't actually need that much desirability because its value is so high, right? But something that has limited value, like a game of Pokemon Go, it's not as useful as Excel in the grand scheme of things, really. But it has so much desirability that it kind of compensates for that and becomes a very successful system as well. Although I wouldn't say Pokemon Go is as successful as Microsoft Excel, but you get what I'm saying. It's all about balancing these elements. If you have high value, high adaptability, high desirability, you're in a good place. If you have low desirability, you have to have very high one of the other two. And the last one is the one that we kind of talk about most often. I left it at the end because I'm going to talk about it quite significantly. So the last one is about, is it easy to use? And systems. There are systems that exist that can that exist that are as simple as a light switch and as complicated as what you see here, the airplane cockpit. And easy to use is a very difficult question to ask. Is a light switch easy to use? Probably. Is a cockpit easy to use? Depends on who's using it, right? It's not a straightforward a question to answer as well. Sometimes, obviously, a cockpit is harder to use than a light switch, but is it actually easy to use enough? Is a difficult question to answer. So the last element of user experience is usability, and this is the one that is the most studied in computer science. It's most studied in HCI, which is human-computer interaction, and we know quite a lot about it. And we've broken it down into much smaller things. Is something easy to use? How do you answer that? There's 5 things that it has to satisfy. So usability can be broken down into 5 things. The first one is learnability. Is the system should be easy to learn so that the user can rapidly start getting some work done with the system. So we achieve that through a bunch of things. Either if the system is very simple, like a light switch, that's already sorted for us. If you're designing something a little bit more complicated, there are things to do to make it easier to use. We can use conventions. So if you're making some tabs for a hotel, probably you want to use blue for cold and red for hot. You can use anything you want. You can make them green and yellow. You can make them pink and brown. Nothing's stopping you. But if you make them pink and brown, you're adding a step. Someone will have to now learn what pink means and what brown means, right? If you make them blue and red, you're making things easier because people are used to these colors. We see that in a lot of things. You see, like the power button. This is the power button. We know it's a power button. Whenever you see this on a device, you know this is the power button. They don't have to put this symbol on it, but putting the symbol on it makes the system more easy to learn, right? Notifications are something that we are all familiar with. We know what a notification looks like. If you put this symbol on a piece of software, someone will know I need to click this button because it's trying to tell me something. This is the search button. Again, conventions make things more learnable. I can much more easily use a system that uses all the symbols I'm familiar with, the conventional symbols, if that makes it more easy to use for me. It makes it, easier to learn, and therefore makes it easier to use. The other aspect of learnability is called affordances. Affordances is when you make something that, even if you've never seen it before, it already tells you how to use it. The teapot is the perfect example. If you show a teapot to someone who's never used a teapot before and told them to hold it, they will most likely hold it from the side of the handle. They will unlikely hold it from the side on the left, because this doesn't look like it's something that I'm supposed to hold. The handle looks perfectly shaped. It looks like something I'm supposed to hold. This is what we call affordances. This is a device that just through visual cues, it tells you how it's meant to be used. Take it from a web design example. Take the example of buttons. Which of these buttons do you think looks more like a button? I mean, obviously, both of them are buttons because the word button is written on them. But suppose the word said something else. Suppose the word said OK or I'm here or whatever, right? The one on the left looks like a button. It looks elevated. It looks like something I can push. And that gives me the affordance of knowing that this is something I'm going to be able to push. And affordances change over time. Nowadays, the button on the right looks like a button, actually, because it's been used so often in that format because of Google's material design and stuff like that. So when things look like the way they are meant to behave, they become easier to use, right? And this is what we call affordances. The other aspect of memorability The other aspect of usability is memorability. Memorability means once you've learned how to use a system, you should be able to remember how to use it once you've used it, right? The system should be easy to remember so that the casual user is able to return to the system after some period of not having used it without having to learn everything all over again. One company that does a really poor job at doing that is Facebook. So Facebook has a really good sort of user interface in general, and it's quite well designed. It has a lot of features and all that kind of stuff. But they change it so often that if you're a casual Facebook user, if you're not constantly checking Facebook and making changes, if you leave it for a year and come back, you don't know what you're doing anymore. They move things around so often that it becomes very difficult for you to remember. So Facebook has very poor memorability, not because of the system itself, but because of the fact that they keep changing it. So memorability is important. I want to be able to, if I use Excel and then go away for 5 years and come back and I use Excel again, I pretty much know my way around, even if they've changed a few buttons here and there. But Facebook changes so significantly that it becomes quite difficult for someone to find things. And I've struggled with Facebook before. So memorability is quite important. The next is errors. So system should have a low error rate, not a big surprise. But we're not talking about just bugs in the system that cause it to crash, because these obviously you want to avoid, not just for usability, for a good product in general. But we're talking about errors that the users make. So the system should have a low error rate so that the users make few errors during the use of the system. And if they do make errors, you want them to easily recover from them. And very importantly, you want to avoid catastrophic errors. Catastrophic errors, they must never occur. And we'll talk about what that means in a second. So low error rate, we want to make sure that when users have low chance of causing errors, and when they do cause errors, there should be a way to recover from it. And you've all run into this problem before, where you just get a blue screen of death, telling you that you've done something, or I've done something that makes this thing no longer work, and now we have to restart, and there's no way to recover from this. And Windows has it, and other systems have it as well. This is, I think, PlayStation probably. This is probably also Windows. And notice here as well, notice that they're all blue. That's not a coincidence. They didn't just all randomly pick the same color. This is a convention. Blue screens of death became popular in the 90s, and so every company now that has a system, they will use the color blue to indicate an unrecoverable error. They don't have to use blue. They choose to use blue because it's a convention, and that makes it easy for other people to understand that. So these errors are failures in usability. When error happens that you cannot recover from, is quite bad. Another kind of failure in usability is when the system doesn't tell you what happened. An error occurred. Great. And then you have these buttons, okay and no. What do I do with them? I don't know. When the system should try to avoid errors. When the errors do occur, try to help the user recover. When you can't help the user recover, at least give them useful feedback. And if in this case they didn't even give them useful feedback, they're just saying an error occurred. But the more important aspect is about catastrophic errors, right? We need to make sure that a system would not allow you to have a catastrophic error at all. Even if you're a user, even if you're completely doing random things and doing really stupid stuff, you shouldn't be able to cause something this bad to happen. So I don't know if you remember this from a few years ago, when there was a false alarm causing the entire residential population of Hawaii to run into shelters because they thought they were going to die. That was because someone in some center made a user error. A well-designed system with good usability, you might make mistakes in it. You might accidentally delete something that you want to do. You can just undo, but it should never allow you to make such a bad mistake that this would happen. That entire livelihoods are threatened, and people might have had like heart attacks from that. People might have suffered serious mental, apart from the economic damage and all that kind of stuff. That's a catastrophic error. And most of us aren't going to be dealing with missile alert systems, so most of us are still at home doing stuff. And we still have our own catastrophic errors, right? If you're a student doing a project and you've spent the last 3 weeks working on the same project and you accidentally delete it, that's a catastrophic error. Most operating systems do not allow you to simply delete files without really confirming, and that's helping you avoid catastrophic failures. So catastrophic errors are something we definitely have to avoid, and we do that obviously through things like confirmation screens. Sometimes you have to have 3 or 4 confirmation screens if something is really, really that important. I don't want to cause an error in it. So then we have efficiency. Efficiency is the fourth part of user experience. The system should be efficient to use so that once the user has learned the system, a high level of productivity is possible. PC load letter, abort, retry, fail. That looks very familiar. Yeah, so we get those things a lot. And often whenever you get abort, retry, fail, usually all of them will lead to the same outcome. So that's something I'm glad no longer exists. So the system should be efficient to use. So once you've learned the system, you should be able to be very productive in it as much as possible. So let's look at these two examples. You have Microsoft Paint, which is a system for editing photos, and we have Adobe Photoshop, which is a system for editing photos, right? They both kind of can do similar things. If I want to crop a picture, both of them will do it relatively quickly. If I want to make a picture bigger or smaller, both of them can do it relatively easily. If I want to change the background of a picture, or if I want to change the color palette of a picture, if I want to make a picture sort of slightly look more like an old picture or add a filter or something like that, then Paint can do it as well. You can do anything with Paint. You can edit pixels individually. You can change individual colors of everything on your screen individually. But Photoshop allows you to do it more efficiently. It gives you the tools that allows you to do what you need to do more efficiently. And so efficiency is actually quite important. Efficiency is all about not just being able to do the thing, but being able to do it as quickly as possible, assuming you know how to, right? It doesn't mean that everyone should be able to pick up Photoshop and immediately become an expert at photo manipulation. It just means that if you have enough training, efficiency requires that you know how to, you can do something very effectively. And finally, satisfaction. System should be pleasant to use so that users are subjectively satisfied when using it. They like it. That's what that means. That's one's a little bit subjective. It's a little bit difficult to kind of quantify, but it's important, right? When something has good usability, if it's subjectively satisfying. So things like so these are two, for example, two match 3 games. On the left, you have a simple match 3 game. On the right, you have Candy Crush Saga. They're both the same game, really, but the one on the right has more satisfaction. You get nicer colors, you get nicer sound effects, you get nicer, we call it juiciness, which is the aspect of a game that is just like kind of like this superfluous sort of exaggerated feedback that makes you excited about what you did, when it says awesome and excellent and that kind of stuff, and all the colors and shines and particle effects. All of this stuff adds satisfaction. It doesn't add value. It doesn't add adoptability. It doesn't add desirability. It doesn't add learnability, memorability. It doesn't add any of those things. It just adds satisfaction, which is important. And satisfaction is also kind of one of the main reasons why some people like to use MacBooks, for example, Apple products versus PCs. They have this quality to them that feels so more satisfying to use. The colors are a little bit sharper. The buttons are a little bit slicker, and the whole device feels a bit shinier. They're not easy to quantify, but the people do cite them as a reason why they want to use a certain product. So that's usability for us in a nutshell. Usability is about ensuring that your system is easy to learn. Once you've learned it, you remember how to use it. It's satisfying to use. It doesn't let you do errors easily, and when they let you make errors, it lets you recover from them. And it's efficient. You do things very quickly. And sort of like all of this is just one aspect of user experience. So user experience is about doing all of these things together. Usability with all its elements, adding value, adding adoptability, and desirability. And this kind of, which brings us back to the question, how do we design for all of this at the same time? If you're a user experience designer, you're told, can you make me a notepad application? You have to worry about all of these things at the same time. And it's hard, right? Like we said, designing for users is a fairly complicated process. You have to worry about a lot of different things. When you're making paths in the park, you have to worry about what are the locations of interest, where do people want to go, what kind of people are coming to the park, what do they like to do, how do they like to walk, how often do they like to come. All these things you have to worry about. When you're designing a user experience for a computer system, you have to worry about, am I making something that's valuable? Is it usable? Is it easy to use? Is it desirable, fun, engaging? Will people be willing to use it based on all the social aspects? So it's a lot of things to think about, a lot of considerations. And this is, again, where we go back to the idea of iterative design. We don't design user experience by just sitting in a dark room thinking about it and then just producing the perfect solution. That doesn't work. No one's that good. Maybe some people are, but don't think anyone's that good. People have to do it through an iterative process. You will start by understanding what it is that you want to make through the requirements process. You design something, you build it, and then you evaluate it. So what we'd learn next, so this is kind of the end of this lecture, what we'd learn next is the idea that the best way to do that, especially in computer science and computer systems, is to do a rapid process. Instead of just building the full system every time, you build a prototype. And that will be the topic of the next lecture. Prototyping is the way we are able to do an iterative process, but rather than spending so much time on each cycle, we do very quick cycles. By not building the full product every time, we build a very small representation of it. And we do that sometimes with paper, we do that sometimes with more complex systems. So to sum all of this up, design is hard because the world is complicated and people are weird, and these are just facts of life that you kind of have to live with. We use iterative design as a concept because it allows us to navigate this complexity. Rather than trying to design everything in one go, we use iterative design because it makes things, gives us a step-by-step process to do that. The goal of iterative design for user experience is to have a good user experience, and that means good value, desirability, adoptability, and usability, which we saw was all those things: learnability, memorability, error prevention, recovery, efficiency, and satisfaction. And that is it. Does anyone have any questions? I saw that Olivier is asking more questions than other people. But yeah, if you have any questions, happy to answer them. Otherwise, I will hand over to Olivier. Olivier, you're on mute.
And Oliver was just about to say, Oliver, don't forget to unmute his microphone. And he did fantastic. Thank you very much, Khaled. That's probably the word of the year. No, the sentence of the year. Hey, you're muted, especially with all the online stuff that we're doing.
Yeah.
So what?
Sorry, just to give a context. So this will be a lecture in the year 2 module called User Experience Design, where we talk about all this stuff. So we talk about the prototyping aspect, and in the next lecture as well. So it's a user experience design as a module for both games computing and computer science students, and we learn all about user experience. How do we design for it? How do we build, and how do we evaluate it as well?
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Khaled. And again, if you've got any questions for Khaled, feel free to ping in the chat, and I'll forward the questions to him. However, at this point, I'll be taking over. So thank you very much, Khaled. I'm going to remove you from the stream forcefully by clicking the remove button. Kapow, he's gone now. And I'm removing his screen as well, because now I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to talk about game programming. And as you can see on the screen, it says lecture 3, game loops. Because this offer holiday activity comes with a bit of a warning. As Khaled said, this is the way I'm going to do this lecture is I'm going to move forward as if this is a second year lecture in the 3rd week of semester B, and I'm going to present it in a way as if you are a second year computer science or games computing student who attended previous lectures and workshop of this particular module. So I'm really going to assume you guys know of the stuff. And there will be content and code that you may not understand, but don't worry, this is normal, because what I'm presenting is second year content. However, the idea is to give you, similar to what Khaled did, a clear indication how programming and games content and UX is delivered and taught to you via online. And again, feel free to dig into the subject in your own leisure, because you can find a lot of stuff that we're talking about here on our YouTube page, if you just look for School of Computer Science, University of Lincoln on YouTube. And again, if you've got any questions, feel free to ping. But again, I'll continue this set of lectures as if you are a second year student. And you can behave in the same way if you want. So what are we going to do this week in games programming? We're going to look at game loops. We're going to look at variable FPS, fixed FPS, and we're going to dig over the code that we've seen over the last couple of lectures and workshops, because last week we discussed about the grounding of development of games. We looked at software programming from a games development perspective, and we looked at what we're going to teach you over the next couple of weeks inside this module. And the idea of the module is to teach you how to create a games engine from nothing at all, that you start Visual Studio and you can create your own stuff in C++. Of course, we're going to use libraries, but that's something we cover. And we've covered, because last week in the lecture/workshop, we looked at how to create our own empty Visual Studio solutions. We created a Hello World program, quite simple stuff. But then on top of it, we also added the SDL library to create and draw stuff on the screen. We included that SDL library, we declared it, we added it as part of our code, we initialized it, we looked at how to create a window, how to create a render, stuff that I recommend. If you haven't done it, look at the workshop from last week. And we also looked at how to create a simple 2D square on the screen by creating a new instance of an SDL rect, set it at position 3030 of a width of 50, height of 50, and then render it onto the screen, present it to the user for 4 seconds, and then stop the program. And again, I've got all the code that we discussed over the last couple of weeks on here. If I compile it, it will take a couple of seconds. And what it does is just render stuff on the screen. Again, stuff that you've seen, should have seen over the last couple of weeks of this module. And today, this week, we're going to talk about, again, the game loop. The game loop, if there is one programming technique you guys can't live without, this is it. The games loop is a quintessential example of a game programming pattern. You can take any video game out there. Every video game has got one. There's no 2 game loops alike, and there are relatively few programs outside of games that use them. What game loops are, I'm going to explain to you using an example of draft. For instance, I'm sure you guys play Draft or Checkers, which is a strategy board game, quite a simple one, which involves players moving diagonally uniform game pieces. You capture pieces by jumping over opponent pieces, and you play it in turn. So what do? You look at the board, you evaluate the state of the board, then you start thinking, perhaps the enemy may do this, may do that. Then you start thinking about future turns. So what you evaluate the board, you look at the board, you move a piece, which updates the board, and then you think, and then you say, yeah, that's it. I confirm my move. Now it's up to the next player. So the next player does exactly the same thing, looks at the board, thinks about a possible move, does the move, says, that's my move, pass it to the next player, etc., etc. And that is repeated until the game ends. That's an example of checkers/drafts on the Atari 26,000. I'm sure if you just Google checkers, you can find endless online version of checkers, either to play against the CPU or against another player. However, again, checkers can be rendered in any way on a PC. It can be rendered in ASCII characters quite easily, or on a mobile phone using pseudo 3D graphics. Plenty of stuff out there. And if we start thinking about, in terms of flowchart, what drafts is, again, it's similar to what I said. Players evaluate the board, then they do an input, update the board state, the visuals updated, passes to the next player, and that is repeated over and over and over again. And something that is very important, especially for this loop, is that time passes. However, the time passes not uniformly, because time passes, for instance, player evaluates game board, that may take more time than just updating the game boards. Actually, the flowchart may look more like something like this. The players look at the state of the board, so that takes a lot of time, because you have to think about your move, you have to think about the next move, what the opponents may do, etc., etc. Then the input, it's actually very quick. You just move the piece. That doesn't require much time, unless you flip the table for some reason and you decide to mess everything up. And then you update the board state, and then the visuals are updated, and that takes time. And then they repeated until the game ends, until the very end of the game, until a winner is decided. And actually, that's what video games do. You update, objects are moving, nothing waits, compared to checkers, where things are waiting. Basically, it's waiting for a player update. But no, in video games, modern video games, you've got constant update. For instance, here I've got a screenshots of, usually at this point I ask the crowd, which game is that? And then the crowd says, hey, Oliver, that's obviously Mega Man 2 from the NES, a game that has been recently published over 30 years ago. Yay. Yeah. Yeah, there's stuff moving on the screen all the time. Objects are moving, nothing waits. Same for the rendering. Things are drawn on the screen. Things are rendered all the time. The character's moving, jumping. A lot of stuff is animating. And constantly, the input is evaluated. You press a button, the character jumps. You press another button, the character shoots. It's evaluated on the keyboard, gamepad, etc., etc., etc. So nothing waits, which is actually yet another loop, which is constantly done. There's a loop that just goes over and over again. That checks input. Has a key been pressed? Has the mouse been moved? Has the controller been pressed? Has something happened? And that is fed, all the data that you get from here is fed into the update. Character's position updated. For instance, you press left, the character is updating its position to the left, etc., etc. NPC's decision, etc. And then everything that has been updated, everything within that game world is then passed towards the renderer, which then renders the stuff on the screen. You press left, the position of X paths changes, and that is then taken and fed onto the renderer, which then changes the position of the world. And that is repeated, etc., etc. And thank you, James. Answered himself before I got the chance to. Yes, you love Mega Man. Fantastic. Absolutely love Mega Man as well, especially the most recent ones on the Game Boy Advance, Mega Man 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are fantastic games. Games Computing students, if you're looking for a good 2D hack and slash jump and run game that is incredibly tricky, that is a bit older, have a look at those games. Yes, Mega Man games, Mega Man 0 games. Anyway, back to the loop. Those type of loops happens for the game of drafts as well. You're checking for input, you're updating the state, and then you're rendering. So constantly repeating itself. And again, this loop is very basic, but you'll find these, as I mentioned earlier, in as good as every games. And here I've got a screenshot of the Unity 3.4 game loop. It's very similar. Actually, it is the same. Things are updated, rendered, and it checks for input over and over and over again. There's just more details. What happens in editor mode, what happens when you start the Unity engine, checks for things are rendered, and you've got the tear down, making sure the memory is clean. It is a game loop, just a bit more detailed and advanced. And actually, we can break it apart even further. So for instance, you've got a more detail about a game loop here. You've got the player input from controllers, from sound, from anything there that is fed onto the game mechanics that just says, if you press left, move the character to the left. And everything is broken apart into animation, AI script, physics, networking, which then updates the game world. The game world is then split apart into sound and graphics, which is then fed to the speakers, fed onto the screen. And there's time that elapses and is repeated. Interestingly, that's the game engine, but nowadays the game engine is split up, as I show here, into different boxes. So you can have the physics stuff that the game developer doesn't care about developing the physics stuff. They just take a middleware engine like Physics or Havoc, basically all those logos that you see at the start when you start a game that does one part of the game. Why reinvent the wheel of physics if there's already libraries out there that does the stuff? Same for graphics. I mentioned we're using SDL. We used SDL last week. We're going to use SDL to do all the graphic stuff because we're not going to write our own graphics engine. We're focusing on our game engine, how everything works. But again, that's repeated over and over and over again. Can take any game. Spider-Man, the newest one on the PS5/PS4, does exactly the same stuff. It's just a game loop repeated over and over again. Mega Man 2, just a game loop repeating stuff over and over again. And it is the same, as I mentioned. You've got an example of a mini character moving to the right. It draws stuff onto the screen. Then it does for the update, then takes that frame, removes it, replaces it with a new frame with the new updated position, etc., etc., etc. Question is, how do we code a game loop? And the answer is very, very simple. And you're going to say, hey, Oliver, that's very bad code, because it's literally just a while loop. Here we've got bool. I've written it in C++, because you can do it in any code language. Bool running equals true, while running equals true. So while true, do the input, do the update, do the render. And this is done over and over and over again until running becomes false, perhaps through the function input. Perhaps input says whenever you press escape, set the running to false, and it stops the while loop. That's exactly what a game loop is in its most basic sense. It's a while loop that just does the input, update, render, input, update, render, input, update, render, input, update, render, until somebody says that while loop to stop. Simple. That's it. That's it for today. No, it's not as simple as that. There's more and more stuff. Why not code our own game loop? But actually, before that, what is the problem of this while loop? Well, first of all, it will run as fast as possible. Because if we look back at the while loop, you've got a fast PC. This will just go input, update, render, input, update, render as fast as your PC can do it. And that's a problem because on some machine, this game loop will run faster. On some other machines, it will run slower. Do you want to have a game that runs with different frame rate on different consoles without having? Yeah, you don't want that. You want a fixed frame rate. For PCs, it's the same. You want to have a frame rate that is not always the maximum. But there's different things. There's different ways. Basically, you want to have, for instance, 30 or 60 frame rate constantly. You don't want to have suddenly 80, 90, and it changes all the time. That is a problem. There's a timing issues. It's also very tricky to develop a program if you have a viable frame rate. So you have to find a way to somehow measure and fix it. And there's two solutions for it on a video game, on PC and for console as well. The very simple one, quick and dirty, is to activate VSync. Is to limit the render rate to the refresh rate of your monitor. If you've got a monitor, when I'm sitting here on 144 Hertz, it will limit the frame rate to 144 frames per second. And that's a problem because we talked about simulation rate, and we're going to talk about simulation rate in the next couple of lectures, and that may be different to what we show on the screen. Perhaps we show the same frame 3 or 4 times, which is exactly the same because we do have a different simulation rate. Problems that we can't think of, and there's plenty of problems. Again, different PCs, again, different frame rate. But the other solution, the better one, the one that we're going to use, is to lock the frame rate, which is actually a better solution because it's a coded solution, a solution where we have power above. The idea is to give blocks of time for each iteration of game loop, which is fantastic for fast machine, not as good for slow machine. And it's used a lot in video games development. As you just say, your game is now running at X amount of frames, and you've got a so-called, I forgot the word, you've got a so-called budget for it, that you say you've got 30 frames per second. That means you've got X amount of frames per millisecond, and you can do the rendering in 2 or 3 milliseconds. You've got 2 or 3 milliseconds perhaps for updates, and 2 or 3 milliseconds for input, and you've got to squeeze that in between. And actually, a lot of video games do that. We had recently, if you guys attended to those Playground Games coming and talking about the budget inside their Forza games. And that works. So actually, we're going to look at that because it's a solution used in the games industry a lot. So the idea is, for instance, you set a frame rate is capped at 50 milliseconds. You basically just say each 50 milliseconds represents a frame. That's it. You set your frame rate from the beginning. And then you just say 30 milliseconds is for a loop iteration to do input, render, and update. And that takes, for instance, 30 milliseconds. And then you just say, out of those 50 milliseconds, then you wait 20. Yeah, during 20 milliseconds, you just say to the CPU, don't do anything at all. And that is great. You're just setting yourself a budget. As long as the update, input, and render doesn't take more than 50 milliseconds, all is good. Because at that point, we've got 20 frames per second. Because it's 1,000 divided by 50. Usually at this point, I'm asking you guys, can you calculate it yourself? But no, I'm squeezing and making things a bit quicker. So you've got 50 milliseconds, takes 30. But let's suppose next time you do another frame, perhaps there's more to render on the screen. And the entire input, update, and render takes 45 milliseconds. Then you just have to say to the CPU, hey, wait 5 milliseconds. And there's problems, though, because if your input, update, render takes more than 50, it takes, for instance, this example, 80 milliseconds. That's like a red flag that just says, hey, there's something wrong within your engine. Perhaps you're rendering too much or your update is bad. Try to find that problem. Why does it take more than 50 milliseconds Figure it out. Your coder, figure out what the problem is. You're over your budget of 50 milliseconds. So you've got to investigate that bottleneck, because you want to make sure that each frame, even though the CPU is told to wait, each frame has to be under 50 milliseconds to render. And if you've got something above 50 milliseconds, there's something wrong somewhere, and your job is to go and fix it. And actually, that's very common in the games industry as a programmer, that you get a task that it says, hey, there's a bottleneck somewhere, go figure out what it is. To program this, since we're using the SDL library, there's a very easy feature called getTicks. And getTicks, you can call it before a set of code and then after the set of code. And getTicks tells you how many ticks it needs to run a set of code. So basically, it's like a chronometer. I just said that whenever you press start and stop to figure out how long something takes. Chronos would be better. We can use the Chronos library if you guys used it and seen it before. But let's use the SDL getTicks since we're using SDL and we've got that library. Why not? And to make things easier, I'm giving you the code. Using the library, using the code from the workshop I'm giving you last week, you can just input, copy, paste that code quite easily. I'm also giving you the code for the timer that comes over the next couple of slides. And that is the game loop that I mentioned at the start. It is, again, while things is not done, repeat the input, update, and render. I don't have stuff neatly presented in functions here, but you guys can do that later. What this does, it sets the timer at the start, measures how much time, basically says how much time, press the chronometer start button, and at the end, I've got the press the chronometer stop button. And during that time, I'm setting a color. I'm saying render the color in RGB 0020, then clear the screen, take my little cube, move the X value, change the color of it to red, then present it on the screen, measure how much time has passed. If it's less than 50, then wait a couple of milliseconds. Again, lots of code, but at that point, I recommend you guys during the workshop, take that code, implement it, see the results on the screen, change the position of X, ask the workshop coordinator, ask me, I can help you to better understand this code. But for the lecture now, the idea is I'm showing you the code, you try to understand what it does. Again, same for coding, it makes more sense once you try and implement that code. I'm giving you also the code for the timer, for instance, how to create ticks, etc., a nice little object with the CPP stuff, so you can just copy paste and change it where needed. There's a couple of comments out. Have a look how this works in your spare time. All right. Before I jump to the conclusion and my memes, all the code I'm showing you, I've got it here. So again, I've got my main, I've got my SDL implemented, my SDL library included, and this code creates a window, creates a renderer, sets the color to 0020, clears the screen, creates a rectangle art, particular position or particular height, and then draws it, shows it to the screen. But again, that is not a game loop. It does nothing but drawing a little rectangle. It's not a game loop because it just shows it once to the screen, one frame, that's it. But underneath here, I've got the while loop implemented, basically game loop implemented, the same game loop that I presented to you during the lecture. I don't have a nice functions for input, update, render, but that can be done, as I said, later. So I'm setting the color to black, then I'm drawing black onto the background. I'm changing my position of X of my little square, which is initialized at 30. Then I'm changing the drawing color to something different, rendering it onto the screen, wait, which is the game loop, as I mentioned earlier. What this code does now, I've got my game loop, a very basic one. So I'm drawing onto the screen, changing the position of X, removing everything drawn on the screen, drawing a new frame, changing the position. Basically, I've got the input, update, render implemented. But again, it's a very simple game loop. I'm not doing any input at all at this point. I'm just updating and I'm rendering onto the screen. Input, update, input, that will be covered in the next couple of weeks. Same for update and rendering. At the moment, we're just rendering a little square. We can render more stuff like sprites, etc. Same for the update. Instead of just moving position in X, we can implement our own physics engine, which we're going to see as well next couple of weeks. However, though, for now, there is a little game loop, quite easy to implement, easy to do. And it actually makes sense. It's just a while loop, repeat over and over again. And if you go over your budget, under your budget, wait time, otherwise, change it. And again, I can change the frame rate if I wanted to. Instead of saying 50, I can change it to 20. Again, I will ask you at that point, hey, how many frames do I have per second if I've got a budget of 20 milliseconds per frame? Then see the results. Of course, that looks smoother because I've got more frames. Haha. All good. So plenty of stuff. Now you guys know how to do a very basic game loop, all squeezed within 20. Oof, it's already 1:45. But again, during the workshop, you guys will understand a bit deeper. Any questions at this point? No, the chat is bizarrely quiet. You guys are very, very quiet compared to the offer holder days from last week. Now, I'm not going to scold you guys. That's not a problem at all. If you've got any questions, again, contact me. That's not a problem. All right, so what have we done in this lecture? Very squeezed lecture about game loops. Yep, what we've seen is we looked at draft, we looked at game loops, and we provided to you a coding solution, how to do a fixed rate frame rate for game loops. And that's an example of a second year lecture. If we continued, if you guys were a second year student continuing in games programming, you would see next week how to do emergent AI using Conway's Game of Life, and we would be digging deeper into pointers and references. However, though, that should give you an idea how I teach, how we, Khaled and I, teach stuff at the University of Lincoln. And again, that's all for this offer holder day. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, feel free to contact me at os@ymenizYK@lincoln.ac.uk. I shared you my email in the chat as well. So feel free to contact me, ask any question. I'm very, very happy as well to share with you the slides. Just ping me an email. That's not a problem at all. Otherwise, that's it for today. Thank you very much, guys, for joining us. I'll stay in the chat for another 5-10 minutes. Khaled will be there as well. Khaled, hello again. Thanks for staying with us.
Hello.
And we'll stay in the chat and answer any questions if you have. So feel free to ping us. So thank you very much, guys. We'll see you guys around.
Bye-bye. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.